Welcome to the module on portfolio management. So by the term portfolio management, we mean basically the diversification in the investment decisions that takes up from the investor's point of view. This basically refers to the definition of the concept, what is portfolio management? So first of all, when we refer to the ideas that are being created for investment from various sources, so those sources can be internal or external, whereby the investment can be taken up and the investors can be identified. Secondly, we want to consider a particular investor or any strategy based on the approved project. So these projects must satisfy certain criteria, and based on that an analytical framework is considered and a decisive framework is being done. Then also the projects should be ranked. So this ranking takes care of the budget as well as the resources, because the budget that is necessary to expedite the project and the resources that are available, and that is why the project's ranking takes place. It also refers to the changes, that is the modifications, the progress and also the results of the findings that appear at the end of this portfolio analysis. Then we also consider that the portfolio can be on an ongoing basis, that can be in a particular year, or it can be continued for certain period of years. And finally, some kind of suggestions can be improvised for improving the portfolio management decisions. So based on these ideas, a portfolio management is a certain structure or a process which needs to be followed. This boils down to the question of definition wise, what is portfolio management? So basically it is gathering the candidates, particularly here the candidates refer to the investors who are creating the ideas which have some investment potentials, and that is gathered from various sources, internal or external. Now we move on to the very important discussions on 8 key processes that are involved in the right portfolio. The first process that comes in is the identification. Identification in the sense that whether an investment proposal is being submitted, how that investment proposal takes care of the potential sectors where the investment can be done, and how these identified areas are being categorized. After this categorization, we come up with the idea of a field or a process called categorization separately. So categorization can be sector specific, which can be in any one of the sectors, either it can be FMCG or automobile or energy or any other sectors where the investment potentials exist, and that has been clearly stated in the identification process. After categorization comes the elaboration. Elaboration means detailed framework or a conceptual building on this particular project, and this conceptual building will definitely bring in some of the major know-hows as well as some of the future potentials. Then comes the prospect of evaluation. So after elaboration we come back to evaluation, where the evaluation of the investment project is being done based on a screening committee and also based on certain proposals which are submitted and whether they are feasible and what can be the returns from the investment in expected terms. After the evaluation step is being done, we have to prioritize among the proposal which areas to be more focused or given more weightage, and this prioritization makes us the concept of selection, because once it is prioritized, then the project can be considered to be approved or selected. And finally, we have a reporting part, where the reporting in the sense that the total report or the draft framework needs to be prepared based on the entire investment proposal, and thereby some scope for improvement comes in. So whenever we are considering that when we are choosing a right portfolio from an investor's point of view, then basically first of all among the all set of portfolios, identification of the right ones are needed, thereby the categorization can be done. Based on the categorization and elaboration takes place. After that the evaluation needs to be taken up of that elaboration, and then the priority basis it can be taken up, whether it can be sector specific or any other prioritized areas. Thereby comes the element of selection, because selection of a project is very important, and thereby comes the reporting part, where the report has to be drafted, and finally the scope for improvement in this process. So based on this, the 8 key processes we have to discuss about the process and the description and how we can consider the practices to evolve. The very first process that comes in is identification as identified. What is that? It's a process for gathering and submitting ideas for evaluation. So identification is basically the collection of the investment proposals that can be done for better portfolio selection, which can be processed through the crowdsourcing. That means it can be given through a questionnaire method, or it can be done on a survey basis, or it can be done to basically the B2B, that is business to business or asset to asset relationship managers. It can be done at the managerial level or at the administrative level. After this identification step gets over, we are back to the step 2, which is categorization. So categorization means what processes will be implied for evaluation, whether it can be mandatory or discretionary, whether it's a minor investment proposal or a major investment proposal, and thereby the classification standards are to be identified, because this is a relative matter. Depending on different investment proposals, this criteria needs to be set. After identification and categorization comes the detailed write-up or the detailed presentation called the elaboration. That means here the concept or the business case must be elaborated in details, which should include the collection of the data or the information, how the analysis can be carried out, and thereby it takes care of some kind of marketing research, whether the data handling, data analysis, the cost benefit analysis, which is an essential part of any investment decision or proposals, needs to be conducted in a rigorous manner, provided with the strategic alignment, and also the SWOT analysis, that is strength, weakness, opportunities, and the threats or the potentials that are being considered. So the risk factors also should be taken care of in this elaboration exercise. So within the same step of elaboration, we have to identify the standard cases, the revision of the business cases, the approved projects, and also how the estimation process can be carried out. All this comes within the step of elaboration once identification and categorization gets over. So after all the three is done, we are left with the step of evaluation. This evaluation needs to be done in the context of a business model. That is, a screening committee should come up, where the scoring should be awarded to the particular proposals by the committee. After the presentation gets over, the re-evaluation can be suggested if it's not satisfactory, and sometimes if the evaluation process is not up to the mark, a second evaluation may also be asked for. So all this comes under the domain of evaluation. After evaluation gets over, we have to go for the prioritization, because once the evaluation is being done, then the top performers can be identified from the evaluators list, who can be ranked and who can be prioritized. This prioritization is an ordinal approach where the ranking of the projects can be done in terms of the content and in terms of the potentials through data-driven analysis, through risk management, and any other exercises that can be done, which comes under the scoring models. So after the prioritization gets over, we go for the selection. So what do we mean by the selection? We determine with the projects which projects will be implemented, where the priority is being mentioned, and what are the resources which are needed. So selection will be made on the idea of the feasibility of the project. Even if the project is selected or shortlisted, prioritization is being done, but at the time of the selection, some additional features will be looked into. For example, the demand versus capacity, because the project may seem to be more demanding, but the resource availability may not be just good enough to satisfy the demand. So there is a trade-off between the words demand and capacity that should be well balanced. Optimization is a very, very important word in decision making, particularly portfolio decision making. Optimization technique is widely used. Optimization means where I have to achieve my objective by satisfying the constraints. So this optimization is a very important factor, and how the planning can be done in this respect. So that goes out to the problem of selection. After the selection is being done, we go by the reporting stage. So what is reporting? Communicating the results. This communication has to be done through different executive reports or through presentations, through dashboards, and to customer feedback analysis, because this is how the public domain will get to know about the changes, about the postponement, as well as about the appraisal part. So both the dimensions are looked into. And then we have to develop a matrix which will look after the improvement. That is called management matrix. So that will take care of the trends, that will take care of the future potentials of the project, the benchmarking needs to be done, and finally how the service can be conducted to improve the project in terms of after the project is being carried out, a kind of a critical evaluation of the study can be done. So these 8 processes which are involved in the selection of a right portfolio needs to be elaborated in the way of identification, which comes at first, categorization, elaboration, evaluation, prioritization, selection, reporting, and finally improvement, because these are the 9 steps which are considered along with it as the 9th step comes for the final project which is in place. So though this is not mentioned here, but the 9th step can be the final project that is in place, comprising of the 8 processes that needs to be actually implemented in the sequential manner. So basically we can invite a question regarding these particular processes which are involved for selection of any portfolio is, what are the key processes which are involved? So among the key processes we have identification, which is written in bold because this is the first step where the proposals are invited, where the collection of the data is being done. After this gets over, we have categorization. After that we have elaboration, that is the detailed write-up. Then the evaluation part, prioritization is also very important. Then comes the selection, reporting, and finally improvement. So this improvement is basically important because when we call for the improvement, we look at the future potentials where the project can carry. So this basically makes the most sense that why after doing these processes, portfolio management is more relevant today. So what makes the portfolio management more relevant today, that is very important. So this looks into the most important policy decision that is being done from the Federal Reserve Bank. It is the changing environment of the federal regulation along the communications services, commercial services, and the social services. Basically it is the social services which comes under the corporate social responsibility, where the healthcare issues that is very much in tune with the federal regulations that are being set. Secondly, there is always a kind of rising demand, vibrant demand that gets illuminated from the self-service or from the customer service, because the customers are basically demanding more and more expectations about this changing environment, and that comes in the order of digitalization. So with this digital economy or the digital globe, there has been always rising demand for various kind of financial services which have the e-platforms or the financial instruments which are coming in. Most importantly, the dynamics or the demographics of a nation keeps on changing. That takes care of changes in economy. So when we say changes in economy, we mean changes in the economic structure, whether it talks about governance, whether it talks about democracy, or it talks about any other fundamentals related to the world of economics and politics. Populations, which takes care of the demographic part, where the younger population, old age population and the proportions change. Property values, which is very important today in terms of security of assets and in terms of intellectual property rights. The employment scenario, which is also a very dynamic structure. Income levels, which takes care of different income groups. Impact, which is actually the evaluation study, which can be done at the local level, at the state level, and thereby the revenues can be generated out of it. So based on all these factors, portfolio management comes in place, where the changes in the dynamics can be taken care of and the revenues can be generated. Most importantly, what is required, and that is making the portfolio management to be more relevant today, is to make a preconceived decisions before investing in the portfolios. And that is largely driven by the agility, that is the confidence, the capability to consider, to decide, execute, and then reconsider the projects. That means whenever the projects needs to be executed, what is the decision level that is taken, what considerations are taken care of, all these are very much relevant for the portfolio management to take up. So finally, in terms of the portfolio management, which is becoming more relevant in today, comprises of the policy issues, that is the environment of the federal regulation, how the changes are taking place. It's because of the microeconomic issues taking from the demand side, which is the rising demand that is coming up, and that is more important because of digitalization of the globe. Then we have the changes in the social, economic and political structure, and also giving the confidence to execute, to decide and to consider whether the project is in line or what future expectations can be derived. So basically on basis of this, we can basically propose some standards, because in the processes we have mentioned, some standards needs to be devised for making the score or the criteria basis and selection process. For example, the standards must be established for the data measures. The data is important in terms of the collection, measures, scores and criteria. So the data is basically where the collection of the proposals is being done. Then we have the measures. What are the measures to be undertaken? After that, we have the scores, that is the evaluation part that comes in from the screening committee, and based on the scores we can select and a criteria is being decided. So based on all these four measures, we can go for actually setting up a portfolio standard in this process. When we go for the standardization regarding the selection of any portfolios or investments in the portfolios, we need to find out this particular box which is being identified from all the processes. So within this rectangle or within this box, some of the processes are being given more and more focus, like from process 2 onwards till process 6. So process 2 consists of categorization, whereby the categorization means the classification standards are identified. Then the detailed elaboration as is stated. Then we have the evaluation method that needs to be carried out, followed by prioritization and finally the selection. So all these four criteria that are coming up, like categorization, elaboration, evaluation and prioritization, are the basic drivers to go for the sixth process, which is the selection. So based on this, the standards are taken up. So whenever we are defining the standards, we are actually measuring in terms of four important parameters. Firstly, in case of the new data. So when we consider new data, that also needs to be identified under the four processes. So when we refer to new data, we refer to this particular row where comes under categorization, where the ideas, the description to be identified. Elaboration is very much important to make a presentation on the cost benefit analysis. What are the future revenues expected from this proposal? What are the risks associated and what can be the futuristic policies? And based on that, we have to come to a conclusion of the selection part, that is which projects can be approved, which will be cancelled or which will have some kind of portfolio outcomes. So basically the data part is important to be underlined under the process. Secondly comes the measures. So when we refer to the measures, what are the popular measures that can be identified? For example, in data analysis, descriptive analysis in terms of the mean and standard deviation, or any other techniques can be applied, like ratio analysis can be done in the financial issues like the rate of return or the KPIs, that is basically the performance indicators, and all this comes under the efficiency indicators of these proposals, and based on that portfolio financials can be set. Then the scores part comes in, which takes care of the valuations. Like finally when the scoreboard is being prepared, then what are the risk factors, what are the weaknesses, what are the strengths, and what can be the overall score and the rank that can be identified. And finally we have the criteria part, which takes care of the ideas that are created, takes care of the clarity and the completeness of the project, whether any incomplete part is there or whether the project is clear or not, whether it is also comprehensive, and how many resources are identified and what are the constraints that can be managed in this regard. That comes under the standardization. So we invite a question here that what are the standards in portfolio management? So you have the following standards like categorization, elaboration, evaluation, prioritization and selection, and based on that all the particular projects needs to be evaluated. So the most important metaphor whenever a portfolio is being done is basically the funnel. It's a funnel shaped approach because it comes from the bottom, and then it appears to the top, which takes care of the digital exploration, the research that is to be done, followed by the proper auditing, and finally the policy prescription, evaluation and research. So this takes care of the processes which are needed for building the portfolio. Basically the processes are repeated here in terms of identification onwards till prioritization, but this also comes there for the building portfolio management. Next we have what are the demand from all sources, because whenever we have defined the portfolio management, we have said that the demand gets originated from the internal and the external sources. So basically the demand sources can be the customers who are basically coming to a customer's feedback mechanism, the state law and the policy, the vendors, the research orientation, the internal ones, and the auditing that has to be done from step to step. So this basically goes for the processes from identification to prioritization. So based on that, we can go for a kind of an approved projects where all these criteria are accordingly satisfied. So that is how the role of technology comes in and makes the process to be complete, for particularly in making a crowdsourcing of ideas accumulating. The workflow needs to be identified for tracking them and also to mapping to the right members. The standards are to be satisfied. The calculations are to be done. The data which is active that needs to be taken up, and also multiple ideas can also be dealt under an optimization exercise. And finally the transparency and the reporting that must be done to the participants, to the stakeholders and to all the members. And that is how the role of technology comes in. So whenever we discuss on the role of technology, we provide a means how to gather the data, whether overcrowding of data doesn't take place, how the workflow can be decided, how the standards can be maintained, and finally how the measures and the scores can be done. So that is how we determine which projects will make the list based on the sanctioning part, where we look for the opportunities and we look for the constraints. So constraints always refer to the resources and the budgets which must be accommodated when the selection of the project is being done in terms of cost, schedule and resources. So that is how a project is being identified here in terms of the budget, in terms of all these clarifications where the tick marks are done, and these tick marks are basically mentioning that the project or the portfolio is being approved, and thereby the processes can be taken up. So thereby we can see that no portfolio planning exercise ends in one pass, because it requires multiple iterations of presentations and how more improvement can be done, what are the resources we can more and more exploit, how the budget can be accommodative, and so there were always some kind of scope for improvement as it goes on. And thereby the role of technology also comes in terms of waterline analysis, in terms of what if scenarios, and how the rapid evaluation can be done in this basis. So this basically makes the decisions to come up on the data, where decisions with the data as it is being said, gathering the data internally and externally, selecting the right projects. Secondly, effectively utilizing the projects in terms of competences, in terms of completeness and clarity. Moreover, the risk management needs to be done. Then how we can plan out a project and what are the changes we can do in terms of all this analysis. So that basically makes an effective portfolio management under this flowchart, where we start with the financial management, where the budget, the forecast is being done. Actual means in terms of the actual realities and the benefits are being expectedly done. Resource management is done in terms of capacity and availability, and then the performance and the management in terms of status, performance, risk. Then only the portfolio management comes in place with decisions, approvals and changes. So this basically makes the role of technology in improving the portfolio performance, providing the accurate data, enabling identification of the underperforming projects, reduces the effort, shortens the duration, provides the support for multiple ideas, faster replanning and definitely transparency that is being taken up. So in summing up on this module on portfolio management, we can see the financial management must be well understood, that is the foundation. The processes must be well in place in terms of the 8 processes, and the issues related that waterline, how the processes can be actually implemented and how the justification can be done. And that is what comes up with these entire identities. Thank you.